Of course, there's some sort of okay, we're live. Perfect.
We're live. Hi,
We're live
LinkedIn.
finally. Oh my god. You look so beautiful.
Oh my God, look at us in our
Just
matching
another
boots, by
day.
the way.
I know, right? Oh my god. Okay, so welcome to Venture with Grace today. So today we have Meghana. Meghana previously served as the head of product partnership for Instagram shopping, advisor to the CEO of eBay, and most recently, the head of global partnerships for Snapchat. She now advises and consults with companies and VC firms full time on strategy, go to market, e commerce, and partnerships. She also speaks and angel invests in the space. Um, Magna graduated from Harvard Business School, was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and currently serves as an advisor to the Stanford Graduate School of Business Entrepreneurship Program. Magna, welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thanks for having me, Grace. I feel like it's about time we finally get to chat live.
Yeah, totally. Oh my God. You have the most interesting and thought provocative contents on the internet. Not thought provocative, but like just making me think in general. It's not like provocative at all, but like it's more. Yeah, I feel like it just makes me think, and then I feel like you always have such interesting take on business and life in general.
Thanks for saying that, Grace. I started posting on LinkedIn just about a year ago and I didn't really know what I was getting into. I think having worked at the big companies, you're not really allowed to speak up much. And so
Mhm.
once I left, I was like, you know what? Let's just put it all out there. And it's been received really well. So it's been kind of like a wild ride. It's been fun.
Totally. Okay, so I'm sorry I make it so cringe because I am a cringe queen, but anyway.
No, you're
I'm
not.
like that. I feel like I need to give like a more casual energy than like I don't know, it's like I don't know Monday morning we're on the news or something, but okay, so today we're going to cover 5 topics. So let's go with the whichever one you prefer.
Yes. So for everyone listening, this is how. So Grace actually gave me this idea, which is, hey, you talk a lot about,
Also, hi
what you
Trish.
learned.
Yeah, keep
Hey,
going, sorry.
Trish, you
Hi.
talk a lot about what you learned at HBS. So why don't you kind of like systematize it and talk about it? And I had
Mhm,
admittedly never really thought about it that way, but I thought this could be a really fun, kind of conversation.
mhm.
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you five very wonky subjects. Well, it's going to be most wonky to least wonky from HBS. And we're going to talk about how you can apply it to like leadership and management in 2024. And would love comments, questions, and we'll make it really interactive. So should I just kick off, Grace?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Okay.
So the first one I wanted to talk to you about is wonky. So we're going real kind of nerdy academic, but I think
Mhm,
it's going to be really useful, particularly if you're starting something this
mhm.
year. So
Hi
the first
Trish and
one,
Jessica, by the way.
hey guys.
Yeah, hi. Okay.
Um, so the first one is disruptive innovation. And I wanted to bring this up because it's like a classic Harvard Business School concept. Everyone talks about it, but I feel like people don't really understand what it is.
Mhm,
Disruptive innovation. What it is basically the idea that big companies often get blindsided by small companies. And the opportunity is when small companies come in at kind of a lower price point or enter at a particular niche and kind of disrupt the whole model. And the idea is that these big companies are just kind of getting comfortable, they're getting a little lazy and thinking that they're going to own the market forever. So, I mean, just to kind of make it make sense to everyone here, think about
mhm,
Kodak, right? In business school,
mhm,
the classic case study is Kodak. They invented film photography and photography
mhm,
as we know it, but they lost pace as soon as digital photography came up. They couldn't visualize a market where film wasn't the primary market or the primary
mhm,
product, and they lost right away. The other one, right, that we often talked about in business school was Blockbuster.
mhm,
So, Blockbuster, right, I'm sure if you're as old
mhm,
as me, you remember going to Blockbuster every Friday night with your parents
mhm,
or friends and getting those videotapes and playing them. And, they could never imagine a world of, broadband internet where,
mhm.
people are streaming and, where videotapes are obsolete. And they moved from videotapes to DVDs, but then they lost track with Netflix. And so that's another example of Netflix disrupting them. So that's disruptive innovation. Does that make sense?
Totally. Okay, so I think I have a question there. So, like, there's like most recently, an example would be like, Microsoft and Google's like
Yes.
AI war. So
Yes.
Google actually invested in DeepMind back in 2014,
Yeah.
and Microsoft invested in OpenAI in 2019. So
Hmm.
technically, like, Google has a vision of like AI is going to change the world, but like, why do you think they are not, as moving fast as like Microsoft in the AI space?
So this is a really good question, Grace. But look, first things first, right?
Mhm,
Google did invest in DeepMind, and Microsoft did invest in OpenAI, which means that they are envisioning a future where
mhm,
their primary core business isn't the core business of the future, and
mhm,
that is disrupting yourself.
mhm,
But my theory on Google is that their core business, the opportunity cost of disrupting it was too high, right? So the
mhm,
idea is, think about Google. Their core business is ads, right? So they
mhm,
kind of benefit from an inefficient search, because
mhm,
when you type something into Google, that first kind of bit, that chunk of results is going to be
mhm,
sponsored, not to mention display ads along the way. However, if you're talking to a GPT and you kind of bypass
mhm,
some of those kind of levels that you might in a Google search, well, that's less advertising space for them. So I think there was kind of like a little bit of a sinister motive. This is just my opinion. I don't know anyone there, or I
mhm,
haven't talked to anyone there. But I do think that, sometimes disruption does mean understanding that it's going to hit your core business. And guess what? They lost to Microsoft,
mhm,
right? They're now playing catch up. Bard isn't necessarily on par with OpenAI, and so I think there's real consequences to not taking that leap, even if it hurts your core business. So for
mhm,
you out there who's listening, right? This is an idea of constantly pushing yourself. What can disrupt my business, and how can I disrupt
mhm,
myself first so that I don't
mhm,
get caught with my pants down, right? So I think it's
mhm,
really about constantly
mhm.
challenging yourself. And then as a CEO or as a manager, being open to those new ideas and having that culture where, people can talk about what the
Mhm.
competitive threats are.
I have a question piggyback on this thought. So basically, so previously I had the former uh CRO of Notion come onto
Mhm.
my show. And then when I chat with her about, how should I go about my business to like, innovate plus, working on my current thing because I don't want to lose focus, spending so much money and time into multiple different things. And then her suggestion was like using 20% of your time into these new projects
Yeah.
and 80% focus on your existing project. I wonder like if I'm a startup founder, how do I not lose focus, but also kind of like trying to innovate and then like, doing something differently?
Yeah, I think the 20% rule is a good one, but mind you, Google has it too. And sometimes it's
Mhm,
just really hard to think about your core source of revenue and thinking about actively, defeating
mhm,
it or going
mhm,
against it. So, as a leader, I really think it's a culture thing where you set up meetings or people who are actively having that kind of conversation of like dissonance and like, hey, in 10 years or in 5 years, where can this technology go? Where would it threaten us? And how can we build that to like threaten our own product? And
mhm,
I know that's really counterintuitive, but according to Clay Christensen, who's
mhm,
kind of, this famous Harvard Business School professor, that's what successful firms do. So it's
mhm.
something you should think about too.
Totally. Okay. So that's a great first topic. We still have four. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, guys, sorry if this is for those listening, if this is getting really wonky, but I hope this is going to be, I'm trying to make it as practical as possible. So, the second topic we talk a lot about at Harvard Business School, and I think is useful to you as, emerging managers or leaders, is jobs to be done, right? And as a product manager, you might have heard this term a lot. This was also coined by Clay Christensen. The idea is that when you launch a product or a business, your consumers, quote unquote, hire you
Mhm,
to do a specific job, right?
mhm,
So, say you're on LinkedIn, LinkedIn users are hiring LinkedIn to find a job, to
mhm,
interact with colleagues, to celebrate their wins online,
mhm,
right? So it's
mhm,
kind of like there's very specific use cases that your users are using your product for. And I think the problem is that as companies grow and scale, or even if you're a startup and you get your first round of funding, you want to do it all, right? It's very
mhm,
tempting to do it all. But the important thing is to stick clearly to the jobs to be done for
mhm,
your user base now. And
mhm,
we've seen at HBS and case studies, but also more practically, when you try to do it all, when you try to be everything to everyone, you can then be nothing to no one, right? So you
Mm,
got to be really careful about, as much as you want to grow and expand, you have to stay really focused to serve your customer.
mm. I wonder, like, okay, so as a startup, how do we find the jobs to be done at the first place?
Yeah. So it's really important. And I'm sure if you have a product, right, you're out there user
Mhm,
testing, right? So it's all about like really understanding your customer, having those research sessions, those test sessions. But the real discipline of jobs to be done is sticking with it. So the example I
mhm,
wanted to share was, I was the first hire for Instagram shopping for the partnerships team. So I
mhm,
really saw, 0 to 1, how we grew that product. And I think honestly, the reason the product wasn't as successful as we wanted it to be was the jobs to be done issue. Users were coming to Instagram initially to interact with their
mhm,
friends and to
mhm,
consume beautiful content, right?
mhm,
And so making that leap from them interacting with friends and consuming creator content to then purchasing it is a really big leap that involves PII data, that involves credit
mhm,
card information, that involves trusting the platform enough to share that
mhm,
information. And I think that would have been one of our issues in terms of understanding the jobs to be done and betting on the right job.
mhm,
So big companies suffer from it, but as a small company, you really need to focus, even if it's hard, even if it's tempting to show VCs that, you have
mhm,
like 10 different products, you really want to
mhm.
stay focused in order to grow.
I have a question on, like, what's your thought on TikTok launching their shopping
Yeah.
in the US?
So I love TikTok shopping. I'm really bullish on it as a product, but I think it can fall victim to the same thing that we did at Instagram. So I'm
Mm.
a I'm a TikTok addict. I don't know like if you
Mhm.
guys are or if you are, Grace, but
Mhm,
I feel like every third TikTok that I scroll through is now
mhm,
a shopping ad. And that's
mm,
not the job I've hired TikTok to do as a user. I've hired TikTok to entertain myself in between meetings and just
mhm,
kind of, when I'm waiting for something just to scroll mindlessly. I'm not looking
mhm,
to shop personally on TikTok.
mm,
However, there's a really compelling value prop when a creator I trust is selling a product that I'm interested in, but it's a balance. And right now, I think they're going really heavy on it. And I think they need to
mhm,
pull back a little.
mm. I think another part about, like, the other day I was listening to your chat on, I don't remember if it's on, like, big technology or like another chat. So basically you mentioned about like why live shopping is not working in the US is because of like China has like the
Yeah.
super app. Um Growing up from China, I feel like my observation to why I feel like in China live shopping would work, but in the US it wouldn't, is because in China, like, people first started live shopping is because of, like, people are buying pearls or, like, some,
Mhm.
like, jade online, and then it's really hard to tell if it's, like, real or fake because of, like, for the sake of, like, the product itself, it's so easy to be copied by, like, plastic or some other stuff.
Mhm.
So, when you buy it, like, you're spending a lot of money into it, and then, like, when you get it, like, you wanna make sure it's real, it's authenticated and
Right.
everything. So, people are shopping about that kind of stuff online, so they need, like, a video to be like, "Okay, so here's, like, a, shell, and then I'm opening it, so I'm giving you a pearl from this shell." So, like, this
Interesting.
is, like,
Yeah.
kind of, like, demonstrate this is, like, a real product or, like,
Authentic. Yeah.
yeah. So when I first saw, like, I feel like that's how it started growing, and
Mhm.
then the other part is like what you said about, like, the trust issue about these big companies, and then, like, it's like China's, like, really bullish on the super app, like, the big companies owns, like, everything basically. So I kind of feel like because of those reasons, it's not really working in the US, but, like, nowadays, like you just mentioned about, like, people's, like, consumer behaviors, like, they're not there to shop. They want to shop in the back of their mind, and maybe they will Google it on Google or, like, find it on Amazon or whatever. They don't really want to be sold. They want to buy to a degree. So I feel like maybe that's that, and, like, I wonder what's your thought on, like, the job to be done? Like, I mean, if you're making, like, a really successful, like, monetization strategy for, like, Instagram or TikTok, how would you go about it today?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So here's the real thing about Instagram shopping.
Mhm,
So to like get even more like wonky and tech with our listeners here,
mhm,
it all kind of started with iOS 14, right? And
mm,
iOS 14 is the platform change in Apple where Apple started withholding data from these big
mhm,
platforms, impacting their revenue, right? They don't have
mhm,
info on their users anymore. Um, and Instagram shopping was kind of a way to combat that, right? It's like, okay, we
mhm,
lost all this data. Now we're going to get it through the transaction.
mhm,
And the problem with that, well, there's two things. The problem with that, number one, was that users weren't willing to do it. But number
mhm,
two, there was no ads behind that either. So what we did is we layered on ads on top of Instagram shopping.
mhm,
They didn't take off as well as we wanted. And
mhm,
Instagram got very impatient to monetize the product, right? They were
mhm,
losing all the ad revenue on the other side. So we're going to make shopping profitable on the revenue side. And what happened, in my opinion, is they switched too quickly from organic to paid.
mhm,
So if I were to do it, back
mhm,
to your question, I would wait. I would be patient. I would
mhm,
take the loss for a bit and get
mhm,
users to start using it, figure out my job to be done on the app, get
mhm,
users engaged and trusting the platform before monetizing it. And that takes patience. And that's hard
mhm,
when you have shareholders, but like I think that's what I
mhm.
would do.
Um, I wonder if you're running Instagram again. Like, okay, so by the way, hi Ariel and hi Gabe. Hi everyone. Okay, so basically, if you're running like Instagram again, like looking at Facebook as a business, like where would you get the money from? So, like, when the time you're like experimenting
Yeah.
Instagram, how would you like allocate your money and resources, and like where does it come from if you're
Yeah.
running that business?
So if we were doing shopping, we what we were doing was a checkout product, right? And the reason we did checkout with shopping is so that we could take a cut of that transaction and so
Hmm.
that we'd have the data, more important than the cut, have the
Hmm.
data for
Hmm.
each transaction, right? So
Hmm.
how Instagram was monetizing it was one, taking that cut of the transaction, but more importantly, getting all that data that you could then retarget people with ads because again, their core business is ads, so any product
Mhm,
they build, it's about feeding back
mhm,
into that ads machine. And so that's how
mhm,
they monetize. And I think that's smart, right? I think
mhm,
that's smart the way they did it.
mhm. What about, like, in the future, like, people are envisioning there's, like, no data collection whatsoever, like, how
Mhm.
would you run a business? Like, what's your vision for, like, in the future of, like, in the world that we have, like, no ads? Or do you feel like that's
Yeah.
never gonna happen?
I mean, I'm super excited for no ads because I love the idea of my data not being used to target
Mhm.
me. Guys, the other day I had
Mhm.
my dryer like
Mhm.
blew up
Mhm.
and there was like lint everywhere. It was like one of those situations. And I
Mhm.
swear I did not Google it. I was just talking
Mhm.
to my mom and everyone about it. And my first Instagram ad was about like dryer repairs for lint explosion. And
Oh my
it's
god.
like getting out of hand, you know? So I would love to see a world in which it's subscription based. I love
Mhm.
subscriptions. Like, I'm happy to pay a couple dollars a month for my privacy and to get like a seamless experience. So I love subscriptions, right? ChatGPT is exploring that now. I've
Mhm.
heard that OpenAI is looking into ads. I hope they don't. I hope they like, stick with subscriptions. But
Mhm.
I don't think the ads model will ever go away. But I think it should be an opt in, opt out, and you opt in with your wallet.
Mm, for sure.
Hmm.
I have a controversial opinion on that because
Hmm.
I'm personally fine with, like, having, like,
And
people
that's fine.
recommending me
Yeah.
something. I just feel like I don't even know I need these things, but now they're sitting on my desk. But anyway, so I feel like I'm one of these people. But anyway, okay.
No, I
So
think that's fine, right? I think some
mhm,
people like that their data is helping them get the perfect item or they don't mind it. And I think there should be just the option to opt out if you're willing to put your wallet
totally.
behind it.
Okay. I think that's a great solution. Moving on to a third topic. So we have investing being a high EQ manager. Okay, investing your EQ basically. Okay, let's
Yes. Oh my gosh, how did all the time pass? Okay, so we're running out of time, but very high level, and this is very obvious, but
mhm.
there's a really cool kind of grid that the Harvard Business Review has, which I will share. Yeah, and Grace has it here. Um,
You're like my TA. I feel like doing this project with you, it's kind of like these like in college we have these like group project or whatever. You're like the A plus student and I'm like a B minus student
oh
and I
my
come
God,
to you with
Stop.
all my questions, and then you're like, I don't know, doing the major homework. Kind
It's
of.
really funny though
Yeah.
because it's like I was telling my HBS friends the other day. I was like, "This is a sign that we're getting old. That I like want to reread cases and like understand lessons." Right? It's like we're getting old.
Oh my god.
uh,
I feel like this is a great, like, basically everything you wrote down are so, like, thoughtful, and then I feel like it's a great exercise for us. Like,
yeah,
we
I
are
think
getting
it's
old
great, and I
anyways,
think
I
more
mean.
leaders need to be thoughtful about how they approach management, and I think sometimes the HBR HBS gets a bad rep, but some of this stuff is really useful. So let's dig into
Mhm,
what makes a great leader. It's the best of HBR from 1998. This is old, but I'll share it, or
mhm,
Grace can share it too.
mhm,
Really high level to save everyone's time is self awareness, self regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill. There's a lot of information in that
mhm,
grid, but really what I wanted to convey to people is that particularly in our
mhm,
world, Grace, in tech, in crypto, in creators,
mhm,
people love a visionary founder, and I feel like that's what
mhm,
Silicon Valley loves. The problem with just a visionary founder though is that you often don't have the
mhm,
fundamentals for a good manager. So I'd
mhm,
encourage everyone, if you're a founder or if you're that COO in the
mhm,
company, to think about actively bringing in EQ, because we've seen with tech companies who have corrupt or toxic or
mhm,
whatever cultures, it happens incrementally. It's never like a CEO comes in and wants like, oh, I want to make this a corrupt
mhm,
place, but it's those incremental steps. And so I think we all need to, like, early on, as you start a firm
mhm.
or a company, think about this stuff, and we can share all of this stuff with you later.
What's the best way to improve your EQ? I feel like when things goes right, I always have a solution, but, like,
Yeah,
when things goes down, like, let's say if I wanna fire someone and, like, I feel like this is just gonna shit's gonna hit the fan, I would
yeah,
just block people right away, or, like, it's not like you're rejecting a date or something, like, you can just
yeah,
go, but, like, it's like you have to pay this person for the next couple weeks or whatever, like, it's, like, a lot of situation to go through, and then you don't really want to hurt people's feelings because this is, like, not technically about them
yeah.
as a person, it's more of a business decision, this XYZ thing is not working. So, as a founder, like without a lot of like with limited resources and without like a massive amount of experience, because like most founders these days are getting younger and younger, nobody have like run like a Fortune 500 before they start a company. So, I wonder how would you implement this into your daily life to become a better leader?
So I think that everyone says like EQ is you either have it or you don't, but I think
Mhm,
EQ can be learned. I think it's really about like literally just thinking about EQ and thinking
mhm,
about like how I can be empathetic every day. It's
mhm,
literally a mindset shift. And I can
mhm,
tell you this as, a young manager, you get so caught up in it earlier in my career. But once you start thinking actively, like, okay, how can I show more empathy? Someone's really pissing me
mhm,
off at work. Instead of writing them off, like, how can I, like, ask them about their day and actually show up, better for them and see what
mhm,
that elicits. So I think a lot of it is just like intentionality. As cliche as that sounds, it
mhm,
actually works.
mhm,
And then the other thing, that a topic that everyone has been talking about, for the last several years now, is vulnerability. And so I
mhm,
think really about putting yourself out there, being
mhm,
vulnerable, and that elicits vulnerability from people too. And that's how you form real connection. There's no real
mhm,
connection without vulnerability. The other interesting thing I'll say before we go to
mhm,
the next one, Grace, is that Brene Brown, who's the leader on
mhm,
vulnerability,
mhm,
I just heard a podcast of hers where she talks about vulnerability without boundaries isn't
mhm,
vulnerability. So I
mhm,
think a lot of managers now kind of commoditize vulnerability, and they're just
mhm.
like, okay, here's like my entire sob story, and here's
Mhm,
the most horrible stuff in my life.
mhm,
You
mhm,
have to think about vulnerability within boundaries for it to be really
mhm,
effective as a manager. Otherwise,
mhm,
you're just venting, right? So I think there's
mhm.
that kind of tightrope to walk.
For sure. I also heard about her book. I was listening to her book the other day, as well as like
Mhm.
there's a good program. I went through Leaders in Tech by
Okay.
Carol. Um, it's basically Stanford's like touchy feely course, but
Oh yeah.
for like
Hmm.
other people in tech, and it's a really good resources. I will link it down below. Okay, moving on to the next.
Okay. So the next one, and if we're short on time, Grace, we can always just skip the fifth one. So it's up to you.
No, no, no. We'll fit everything in, but maybe like
Okay.
we'll go 5 minutes longer if
Yes.
that's fine with
Okay.
you. Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Sounds good. So, okay. So the next one is strong opinions weekly held. I'm
Mhm,
really into this concept personally, as a manager and a leader, in
mhm,
companies, but I think just as a person too, it's like a great philosophy to adopt. So the
mhm,
course this came from at HBS for me was we had a course that was a joint course with the Kennedy School, and it was about
mhm,
studying great leaders and what
mhm,
they did in their spaces that worked for them. So the leader we
mhm,
studied in this case was Lincoln. And so what Abraham Lincoln did is when he was elected president, his entire cabinet was made up of his intellectual rivals. His Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, I believe, were his literal Republican presidential rivals. And then
mm,
others within the cabinet were all like Democrats or intellectually opposed to him, etc. And I
mhm,
think I know he did that
mhm,
intentionally because he knew they were the best and the brightest. They didn't agree with him, but he wanted to create a culture where that disagreement and that conflict was there, but a
mhm,
respect for everyone's opinions was also there. Now,
mhm,
to put that into tech and VC from like Lincoln to now, I think the problem with a lot of tech companies right now is that leaders
mhm,
love to hear that they're right. I mean, I love
mm,
to hear I'm right, right? And they
mhm,
surround themselves with yes men or people that tell them they're right. But I think the difference between a good and a great leader is a leader who surrounds them with people who challenge them. So,
mm,
as a leader yourself, if you're listening to this, think about your personal board of directors or your professional one and
mhm,
how you can have people in it who respect you, who love and adore you, but at the same time, they give you that intellectual challenge because I think it's that challenge that makes us better. It makes us more empathetic. And leading to the last point, it just makes us
mhm,
more high EQ leaders. So
mhm,
always think about how you're challenging yourself. Check yourself if you have yes men all around you.
mm.
And think about Abraham Lincoln.
I have a question on this. I think it's good to surround yourself with like people who challenges you, but I don't like to surround myself with like people who challenge me just within my company because I feel like it would be really tough to get to a point that everybody agree and like passionately go after a goal. I think the example of Lincoln is like really great, but like I think one of the challenges like people have different intentions, right?
Yeah.
There is a basically there's a book called Challenger Sale. So like
Mhm.
people would sell you something to like the strategy is like kind of challenging your thinking and then not like in a bad way. Of course, like presented by the book, it was not like, oh, I need to sell you something, so I challenge you. But it's more of like, okay, so presenting something in a different light as well as like helping you see the big picture. However, not everybody's intention is well-rounded. Sometimes people
Yes.
just don't want to do XYZ because of they
Sure.
personally don't want to do X in your company. So I wonder how do you kind of like measure that like if someone is giving you their genuine opinion, they really want everything good for you, they're challenging you in that way or um
Yeah.
the other way around, basically.
I think that's super fair, right? You're going to have people challenging you with bad
Mhm,
intentions that
mhm,
decrease your authority. There's always like that drama, if you will,
mhm,
in a corporation or firm.
mhm,
Um, I think this is slightly different though. The idea here is that you have the final authority. You make the
mhm,
decision, and that
mhm,
respect and trust is there in the room, right?
mhm,
You're not just getting like random people who disagree with you into the room,
mhm,
right? These are like your people who you I'll give you an example. Some of
mhm,
my best friends from business school, shout out if they're listening,
mhm,
are really big Trump supporters, and I'm not, right?
mhm,
And we have really good debates about it weekly on text, right?
mhm,
And the foundation for that is a trust that I really like this person. They're good people. And I think of them as like intellectual equals. So
mhm,
that's like the foundation. And then when we disagree, it's like on top of that foundation.
mhm,
So again, if you take that to a corporation, right? The idea is um, you know, these are people who you really trust, who are
mhm,
giving you feedback. But then the other thing is, you as a leader have to
mhm,
be willing to have that strong opinion weekly held. You have to be
mhm,
willing to have an open mind about changing your
mhm,
intuition. But the
mhm,
final call is always yours.
mhm. I feel like you just made this so much so much more like making sense because I always hear people talk about like strong opinion weekly hold, but I didn't really know it was like you kind of like doing a lot of research and then actually having a debate with like your intellectual equals, quoting your words. I feel like this is a so much more interesting and effective way to think about it.
Yes.
I wonder, like, how do you pick that board of advisors? And like, because like if they don't agree with you on a lot of things, you probably never gonna be friends with them in the first
Hmm.
place. How do you kind of like filter these people out? And then if you never went to business school, like we're in a startup land, like nobody went to business
Yeah.
school as a founder, like not nobody, but like I would
Yeah.
say half of the people never went to business school because they're engineers. They like never coming out of their shell. They like to code, right? Like we all seen the TV show like
Hmm.
Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
seen, but like I
Of
recently
course.
just watched it. But anyway, so we're talking about a lot of like tech leaders here. How do you find that group so you can trust them and then like kind of like challenging each other's opinion? By the way, hi Denise. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
So here's what I tell these
Mhm,
people. And if you're an aspiring leader or founder, or you
mhm,
are one, um, I actually think this isn't about the people as much as the culture you set, right?
mhm,
You have to set a culture in the team and in the
mhm,
room where, hey, we're having this debate. We're going to go
mhm,
at each other's throats. But
mhm,
one, I have the final call. Two, I'm going to
mhm,
respect your opinion and we're going to really understand it. And
mhm,
those people are free to speak up and challenge me in a
mhm,
respectful way. But that's a culture that I set, right?
mhm,
We've all heard about founders and leaders who, like, they all the people in the room are their friends
mhm,
from college. I've
mhm,
worked at one of
mhm,
those places.
mhm,
And he's the founder, he or she says something and they all agree, and then that's where it goes. But you have so many blind sides that way, right? So the idea
mhm,
is you want people to be feel safe
mhm.
enough to challenge you, know that that's going to be respected, but then the final call is yours.
Okay. I think that's a great way to do it as like, setting up the environment to make people
Mhm.
comfortable about sharing a different opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next. So we have fake it until you make it. This is the most controversial one in this sheet, by
I
the way,
know.
for
I
to be honest.
know.
Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, so I know this one's a little controversial, and this isn't exactly an HBS lesson, but more of like a management theory lesson. So it's actually a lesson that I've learned from Andy Grove, who's
Mhm,
obviously he was the CEO of Intel and just a great
mhm,
management leadership theory kind of dude.
mhm.
I grew up just
Cute.
northeast from him because my
Mhm,
dad worked for him for several years at
mhm,
Intel, and so I really feel connected to his like management style and leadership.
mhm,
So Andy Grove's kind of philosophy on fake it till you make it, I think is really relevant to us here in the tech
mhm,
world and those of us listening. But I know there's some caveats and we'll talk about
mhm,
those. So the idea he talks about is that you essentially have to act with power in
mhm,
order to achieve power. And I want
mm,
everyone listening, particularly women or those early in their
mhm,
career, to embody that, because I feel like a lot of us are so insecure early in our career,
mhm,
that we are scared to act with power. So
mhm,
the idea with this is what you act with power in order to
mhm,
achieve power. What
mhm,
started as an act becomes less so, that because attitude follows behavior, right? So you start acting
mhm,
with power, and then that attitude around you starts changing because of your actions.
mhm,
The second layer of that is that emotions are contagious. So
mhm,
what you put out there is what people will kind of believe in. So for example, like
mhm,
just to put this into real life, you're walking down a hall and
mhm,
you see a person, right? If I'm having a really bad day, like maybe I'm just like, I look away and blah blah blah, right? And that interaction is done. But what if
mhm,
I'm having a really bad day and I decide to act with power and put out an
mm,
emotion that I'm not really feeling? I see someone walking by me and I'm like, hey, and I pretend like the world is my oyster and I'm walking on cloud nine and
mhm,
I'm doing great,
mhm,
right? That person, because I put that energy out there, is going to accept that energy and believe that about
mhm,
me. And then the third part of this theory, sorry, it's a little complex, but hopefully
mhm,
this is resonating, is that emotions are self reinforcing and self reflective. So I'm putting that out there. They're going to accept that I'm on top of the world. I'm a leader. I'm doing great. And then they're going to
mhm,
reflect that back onto me. They're going to say, hey, Meghana, how
mhm,
are you doing? Like, what's going on? And that's going to be reflected onto me.
mhm,
And then emotions being contagious, I'm actually going to start feeling good. Now, I know this was
Mm,
like kind of like dense, but what I'm trying to say is what you put out, very simply, what you put out there is what you get back. And
mhm.
that's in terms of faking it till you make it, but also in terms of mood and energy as a leader.
Okay, first of all, I want to address the comment. Sarah, yes, Magna is legit AF. This is true. By the way, I want to say, I think you do this so great because like the first time I met you at like in person, at the Blue Bottle, I was like, oh my God, is this like one of the Kardashians? Like you were like literally walking in
Oh my God,
with
that's
like
so
you were
sweet.
like
Thank you.
literally like the most like beautiful and extra person in Silicon Valley because I was like, "Oh my god, dude, we're at the Stanford areas like Blue Bottle and then like everyone there were in t-shirts and like I don't even know like nobody have makeup like everyone's like hair is in a bun and like basically people are like building a startup there and then Magna walking like basically the cousin of like Courtney or whatever like I was just
I'm
literally in
so
shock
flattered.
like seriously, like, you're, like, the most, like, well-dressed person in Silicon Valley as a
Also, I
whole,
really
as a
appreciate
whole.
that, but it's also really funny because for any of the women listening, I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, only worked in tech. So
I was
you
in
know,
shock when you mentioned that to me. I was, like, literally
I
having a heart attack. I'm like, "This person is, like, definitely born from, like, New York, LA, or somewhere that's not here." But
but like that's I show up really authentically, and like what I want to tell other people is that I've been underestimated for how I show up at the workplace, and because I dress well in tech or whatever it is. So just keep being authentic, and like I really believe that particularly we as women sometimes get judged
mhm,
stylistically versus
mhm,
substantively, and that sucks. But like I'm all about fighting it.
mhm.
So you know.
Yeah, I think okay, so let's talk about a counterexample of being authentic or like, fake it until you make it. We all know a company out called, WeWork. I mean,
Yeah.
I love WeWork as a product, but the leader is very controversial in the
Yeah.
news, right? So I mean, I personally don't know him, so I don't know if any of these things are true, but like based on like what I read on the news, it seems like, some people just take it too far when it
Yes.
comes to fake it until you make it. How do you like walk the line? So sometimes I feel like when I hear a lot of founders pitch are like super crazy. Like they are yeah, like if someone come to me, they're like, I'm disrupting Google. Like whenever I hear these pitch, I'm like, yeah, this is like a really great idea. But right now we're talking about you building this software for like a content or something, right? Like so basically everyone have like a really great it's kind of like what is it called? Like the delusion, what was it, like, the
Mhm.
magnetic something field? What was that called? I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Distortion field?
I know what you're talking about, the
Yeah.
reality distortion field.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. So, I kind of feel like almost a lot of really good founder have that.
Yeah.
So, like, they're really good at, like, convincing everybody to do things, right? So, like, I
Mhm.
wonder what's the line that you should cross or not
Yeah.
cross in terms of
So
having that?
um, I'm really glad you brought this up because you think about Elizabeth Holmes and like all these examples of like faking it to your till you make it to the extreme. The way Andy Grove and like this theory goes is from a management perspective, not a product perspective, right? And I think what
Mhm.
what happens with the Silicon Valley is we often think about it from a product perspective. Like I'm going to keep faking it. I'm going to do the dog and pony show for investors and like eventually the product will get made or whatever, but this is very much about management, so more about
Mhm.
um if you're feeling bad one day or if you're
Mhm.
feeling low, like faking that in
Mhm.
order to actually believe in it. If you're earlier in your career and feeling insecure, faking that in order to kind of get to the next level. So it's more like an energetic management theory thing
Mhm.
versus a product or builder related thing, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Totally. I wonder, so how would you act as a leader? And then like sometimes I feel like there's just like a thin line between like fake it or made it
Yeah.
because I feel like it's all depends on like if you can actually deliver your final product.
100%.
If you deliver, you made it, right? Like,
Hmm.
but like when you are giving a pitch, you have absolutely no product, and then you have like one person that's like in your backup engineering team, like
Yeah.
oversee, like you're basically like faking it, right? So, like, how would you? kind of like do a reality check for yourself as a founder? We could all fake it outside,
Totally.
but like how do you kind of make it in the end?
Yeah, totally. Look, I think a lot of this is like at the end of the day, like your personal ethics and how you
Mhm,
have your own moral compass when it comes to building a product, when it comes to talking about that. But again,
mhm,
faking it till you make it with a product is very different than faking it till you make it energetically or with a management, as a management theory, as a theory of
mhm,
interacting with colleagues or investors.
mhm,
But yeah, look, I think there's real ethical lines that you have to do the work on personally as a manager,
mhm,
as a founder, investor. And like that's personal work. And I think just how we
mhm,
talked about EQ is something you need to be curious about and you need to think of.
mhm,
Just thinking about EQ will help you get
mhm,
EQ, right? If you just bring it
mhm,
into your mind every day. This is
mhm,
one of those things where your personal values and your personal ethics, you need to think about it and do that work, and
mhm.
that's going to reflect in how you show up, the kind of interactions you have, and then the kind of leader you're going to be.
For sure. Okay, so one last real question in this topic, right? So there's so many times like CEO started like in the fake it category we have marketing doing all these like PR stuff, right? And then on the other hand we have the people who have to like make it, right? So as a CEO your job is to promote your company as well as
Mhm.
building your product. So how much time would you spend on faking it and how much times do you spend on making it?
Well, I think that's a fair question. My pushback
Mhm.
is that I don't think marketing and PR are faking it. I think marketing and
Mm.
PR are amplifying it, right? So I
Mhm.
want all of you tech people who are going to be
Mhm.
hating on GTM or go to market people to remember
Mhm.
that these people are just amplifying your message. It's not like
Mhm.
magic and it's not alchemy, but really it's just amplification of the core message and the reality. So I think I'm biased because I'm a
Mhm.
GTM girly, but I think GTM is very important. How I kind of put it is if you think about a product in that Confucian saying, like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it fall? If a great product is built, but no one takes it to market, does the product even exist? So,
I love it. Oh my god.
so I think you really have to invest in GTM. And like, of course,
Mhm.
the core product is really important, but unless you're getting it out there and your message and principles are being out there, does it even matter? And like, my
Mhm.
argument would be no, it does not.
Oh my god, I love that. I love you have a Confucius quote at the end. Okay, so on that note, we're at the end of this chat, and please share. Like, by the way, please share. Like, you have such a great quote here. For the audience, I want
Oh,
to end
yeah.
on this. Like, don't be humble. You're not so great.
I love that quote. And I especially want people early in their career and women to embody this because it's something that, the statistics have shown that they don't. So the quote is from Golda Meir, and she says, "Don't be so humble, you're not so great." And the idea is, why are we not talking about the work we're doing? Particularly women, particularly young managers, get out there, talk about yourself because everyone else is doing it.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I'm sobbing. Okay, my inner self, it's like kind of like my voice breaking
Silent
down with
sob.
that stuff. Oh my god. Okay, so where can we find you? Oh, by the way, hi Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining this. Okay, please let us know how we can find you, how we can stalk you. Give us all
I'm
the tea.
really a LinkedIn girly, so find me on LinkedIn at Meghana Dhar, and then my Instagram is at Meghana.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Grace. This was a great conversation, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
I'm ending